Welcome to the Gastro Girl podcast. We bring together patients, experts, and health advocates who are all here to help you optimize your health. Here's your host, Jacqueline Gaulin.
Hey everyone, welcome to the Gastro Girl podcast, your trusted source for everything digestive health. I'm your host, Jacqueline Gaulin, and today we're diving into one of the most talked about topics in gut health, probiotics. You've probably heard a lot about the so-called good bacteria from commercials, your social media feeds, and maybe even your own doctor. But do you really need a probiotic? And if so, how do you know which one is right for you? Well, today we've got the perfect expert to answer all your questions. I'm thrilled to be joined by Dr. Neil Stollman, a leading gastroenterologist from East Bay GI in Oakland, California. Dr. Stollman is renowned for his work in advancing clinical care and understanding of the gut microbiome, including related areas such as C. difficile infection and fecal transplant. And as always, friends, don't forget to like, subscribe, share, and write a review for the podcast and the podcast episodes. Thank you so much. Dr. Stollman, thank you so much for joining us today.
You're welcome. Glad to be here again.
I know. We love having you. And this is a great topic. So why don't we just get started by getting everyone on the same page and just explain what probiotics are and how they work in the body?
Sure. So the term is defined. Actually, the World Health Organization has a definition for probiotics. So I can think it's this or you can think it's that. But in fact, there's sort of an official definition, which is a living microorganism, a live microorganism, which confers a health benefit on the recipient, basically. So you're putting a live bug in or on, sometimes, depending on how you're using it, to a person with the aim of conferring a benefit. That's essentially what a probiotic is. Now, we tend to think of them as bacteria, and most of them are, but in fact, they could be a yeast or some other such thing. It may not be a gut-directed probiotic, too. There's, in fact, probiotics directed at other parts of our body. Recalling that we have a biome, we have lots of biomes. We say the word biome, right? And we've done a podcast on fecal transplants and the colon biome, and that's a very specific thing. But recognize, and that's what we're going to talk about today, because that's my only expertise. So you can ask me anything else, but what I know, of course, is the gut microbiome or the GI microbiome. But in fact, there's a skin microbiome, and there are people talking about probiotics that might help our skin health. There's a vaginal microbiome, and people talking about probiotics that might be beneficial for that. We've got oral biomes. People talk about probiotics for oral health, oral hygiene, and the like. So again, I'm simplifying it as gut health today, and everything we're going to talk about really is going to be under that rubric. But in fact, it is a more generic term. And then you asked, well, how do they help? And there's either a short answer or a longer answer. The short answer is, I don't know. And in fact, we often don't know, right? There are a lot of theses as to how, particularly in the gut, putting these new bugs in. And we imagine or talk about, and in some cases can demonstrate experimentally, that they augment our gut's immune system. There are ones that can sort of upcharge our immune system and make our gut immune system work better or differently, depending on what that means. They may impact what we call colonization resistance, and they may not let other bad guys come in, basically. They may be a barrier to other bad guys coming in. They may have a metabolic role. Our bugs do things. They're not just there. They're not just hanging out inside us. They're actually metabolically active. And in fact, there's a term we use called the metabolome. It's similar to the biome, which is the bugs or the bug material, or the microbiota. But the metabolome is to reflect that there is activity there. They're not just campers hanging out. They're doing things to each other and from each other and to us and from us. They're very sort of symbiotic with us. So there are a lot of different ways that bug may or may not help us. And you can't really answer that for most illnesses. There certainly are some scenarios where we think they help, and we'll get into those scenarios. But the mechanisms are hard to pin down.
So, and how do they interact with digestion? Like, people always associate probiotics with the digestive system as well as the immune system. But I think, people are drinking stuff and
they associate it with that because
stuff.
That's all the advertising, right? So to take a little step back, as we know, probiotics are treated by the FDA as a dietary supplement, not as a drug. And if they were a drug, they would have to it would be expensive, but they'd have to do a whole lot of studies and try it for this and try it for that and do safety and make claims and look at disease outcomes. And the FDA is all over drugs. It's really, really hard to get a drug on the market. It probably costs $1 billion or more to get a drug on the market. So the FDA has this other class called dietary supplements or just supplements. And the standards there are radically different and radically less stringent. And you don't really have to prove much. You kind of have to prove it's safe and isn't going to kill someone. And then to the question you asked, their claims are kind of structure function claims. They're not, you can't claim to cure a disease. If you say this jar of pills at Whole Foods or Trader Joe's or wherever is going to cure X, Y, or Z, the FDA will say, no, you can't do that. But they're allowed to make kind of these vague general claims. And a common one, for example, is improves digestion. So you can get away with saying, take this and it'll help your digestion. You can't say it'll cure your IBS or your ulcerative colitis or your diarrhea or your constipation or your cancer or your eczema or anything else, but you can say it will improve digestion. So that's a common way they are marketed. So the whole world reads all these things and they're all marketed to improve your digestion. But taking a step back, what the heck is that even mean, really? Digestion is a giant term. We take in foods, we assimilate, we break them down, we absorb them, they come out. And probiotics probably don't do very much for that process, actually. So probiotics may have benefit for health, and we will talk about the scenarios where we think they do. But in fact, they're really not that important for, quote, digestion, semantically speaking. But that's what the pitch is, right? I mean, These guys have been around for a long time, of course, right? These were, I learned today, the first probiotic came out almost exactly at 1900. I did not know that until today. The good folks at the Pasteur Institute who were studying bugs in 1899, 1900, so 125 years ago, quite literally, started to understand the germ theory of disease. That, we take that as for granted, right? A bug causes an illness, antibiotics kill bugs, blah, blah, blah. That's not, we didn't know that until 100 years ago, basically. And they use that term, a probiotic. That's kind of where the term came from. And the first one they described, they found a little bug in the stool of healthy people, not sick people, that looked like a Y. It had kind of a shape, and it was bifid. That was what it looks like. So they called it bifidobacter. It was a bifid bacteria, right? It was a bacteria with kind of two corners or two horns. So they called it bifidobacter. And it turns out that's kind of a very loose term, and bifidobacter is really the genus of bugs, and there's a species and a strain well below that. But that's kind of where they started. It's a little bit ironic that the pasteurization now means to kill bugs. If you think about it, right? Pasteurization is a term we use to applying heat to a food product with the aim of making it more shelf stable, right? So it doesn't turn bad, it doesn't turn sour. And by the way, the first ones they found were sour milk. Spoiled milk was kind of where, soured milk particularly, is where people kind of started to understand these bugs, that soured milk was healthy, raw milk was healthy. It had these bugs in it. But pasteurization, named for Louis Pasteur, of course, in the Pasteur Institute, is actually killing bugs. He wasn't an assassin, he was a brilliant scientist. But it's kind of assassinating bugs. That's why you're pasteurizing something. You are getting rid of bugs. You can add them back in afterwards if you wish, but that's what pasteurization does, right? Is it kills the bugs. Anyway, that's probably more information.
Oh, it'll be interesting. No, it's interesting because then you want to look at, well, what did diseases look like? And did we have, what were the incidences of like IBD or inflammatory bowel diseases?
Yeah, they weren't. As you well know, they weren't, right? These are sort of modern diseases, and it's not the topic of today's talk, but we all understand this kind of conception that we've come up with of bugs are bad, kill bugs, right? We've vilified bugs, but in fact, your bugs, right? You've got bugs on, in, all over you, and the extraordinary majority of those bugs are good for you. They're not bad for you, right? Bugs are essential. You can't live sterile. No humans are sterile, nor should we be. You could not live without a biome. And almost all the bugs in your nose, in your mouth, in your ears, on your skin, in your colon are good bugs who are helping you. Which they're not people. I'm anthropomorphizing here, but which are helping us to promote health. Bugs are good. But of course, we also have the germ theory of disease, that bugs cause illness, which is a tiny, tiny, tiny fraction of all bugs, but they do. So we've kind of vilified bugs, right? Bugs are bad, kill bugs. And we came up with antibiotics, the era of antibiotics, which is, again, killing bugs. And now we're kind of coming full circle where it took 100 years, literally, for us to realize realize that, wait a minute, we shouldn't just kind of be killing bugs. Yes, kill strep when it's in someone's throat, because if you don't, they might get rheumatic fever or some such thing. But other than that, we definitely don't want to be doing that. So I don't even know the question you asked me at that point, Jackie.
No, I love this. I mean, we have to love the bugs.
Yes.
We can't be killing the bugs.
I
agree. But seriously, this brings me to the $1 million question here.
Yep.
There are so many products available out there. How in the heck do we figure out which one, if any, is right for us?
Yeah, I'm happy to
It's
answer
so
that.
confusing.
I think for most people, for the large majority of people, my sort of short answer is none of them. And I'll elaborate on that, because that sounds like the end of your podcast, doesn't it? None. We can go home now. We're finished. I think for the large majority of people, particularly relatively healthy people who are looking for health benefits, not treating an illness. And please ask me sort of what illnesses we treat with things. We'll come back to that.
Yes, that's
but
coming
most
back.
people are not treating an illness. They are taking probiotics because they believe kind of there's a health benefit for them. That may or may not be true, but it's probably not true. And taking a bug in a pill is not the natural way to take our bugs. In fact, almost all of the bugs in pills are designed to be cultured in a laboratory. They're not designed to live in us. And you're probably aware of this. We've done dozens of studies that literally do this study again and again and again. Go to the shelf of probiotics, and there's going to be 20 of them on that shelf, right? And they're all going to compete with each other in what I call the billions wars, right? We got 6 billion. And then the one next door is, we got 9 billion. So we must be better. And then the one down the shelf is, we got 22 billion. And it's nonsense, right? It's not anything. Take them to the lab and then say, okay, first of all, do you even have the bugs in that pill that you say you have? Half the time they don't. It's just a label. They don't actually have the bugs that they're telling you they have. If they have them, they don't have them in the dose they necessarily tell you they have them. They may have a different strain, and we can talk about that. And they may have other bugs in them too. So there's essentially no quality control on that. So you may think you're getting, Trader Joe, I don't pick on Trader Joe's, but a lot of people get there, or Whole Foods. That's where a lot of people buy our stuff. Actually, my Sprouts, there's a Sprouts around the corner from me. They got a friggin' aisle of probiotic stuff. They really do. I mean, it's a lot of stuff, and they're all making these ridiculous claims. And I would suggest that actually none of them are particularly useful to a healthy person. If the question is here, how do I enhance my health? And rather, the person who's on that shelf at the supermarket should instead turn left and go somewhere else. Where they should go is to both the fruits and vegetables section, and they should go to the refrigerator section, where we keep things like unpasteurized, important term, unpasteurized sauerkraut or kimchi.
I knew you were going to say fermented foods.
Exactly.
I knew it.
So the question you asked me, which I think I remember, is, which one should someone choose? And the answer I'm suggesting is none of them. Most healthy people should not waste their money on a pill-based probiotic in the belief that it's going to enhance their health, because that's simply not true. Again, we'll turn to disease, different conversation,
Yes.
but to health, you are far, far, far better augmenting your ecosystem with fermented foods or living foods or bug-laden foods or cultured foods. There's a lot of euphemisms, but what we're talking about, and I'm happy to throw out a bunch of them. We start with the K's, right? Kombucha, which is a tea-derived, it's sort of a fizzy, I think it's from Russia. It's from the Caucasus Mountains. It's a fizzy tea drink. It's kombucha. Kefir, or actually my kids corrected me. I think it's kefir. I think my kids yelled at me because I said kefir. Kefir.
Kefir.
I have teenagers. Actually, they're older. Kefir is a yogurt. It's a liquid drinkable yogurt. It is actually probably better from a bug perspective than standard yogurt. Most yogurt actually is not, like Dannon for whatever, is actually fortified. They put in lactobacillus or something after they do it. Most yogurt may have one bug or no bugs, but kefir has a whole bunch of bugs. Kimchi, the third K in the holy trinity of Ks, kimchi, which is fermented cabbage. It's essentially Korean sauerkraut in a sense. It's a fermented cabbage. Sauerkraut, of course, a fermented cabbage, also German product. Now, the key at pickles are probiotic living food. They're brined. The key, for example, for the sauerkraut and the pickles is not to go to aisle 6, where there's a shelf of glass jarred sauerkraut and glass jarred pickles. Those have been pasteurized. What you got to do is go to the fridge section, where there's the plastic jars of pickles and sauerkraut and other such things. So you want unpasteurized things. Apples have bugs in them and on them. Actually, we don't think of apples as a sort of probiotic food very often, but they are. Soy miso, a soy-based product, is a good bug-laden food. There are other soy products like tempeh and things like that are also good living food. So that's really where the person who says, "Hey, doc," or Jackie, or whoever, which one should I choose? I'm going to take their elbow and gently escort them away from that shelf and move them over to the fruits, vegetables, and living food section of the supermarket, which is a far better strategy for them to augment their ecosystem.
Well, I'm glad you pointed out about the living food and the unpasteurized, because wasn't there a study, I think at the last annual meeting, that by Dr. Hazan, where she looked at the amount of bifidobacteria in some of the yogurts, and it was nothing when it said on the label.
Exactly. It's absolutely correct. Sabine, the person you're doing is a very thoughtful and skilled and curious woman. She's a Bifido fan. If you ask her, she's the biggest cheerleader for Bifido these days, and she may be right. We'll find out. I mean, how much? But she thinks particularly this bifid bacteria or bifidobacteria. But there, of course, are others, right? And so you can look at the jars, and they have all this stuff. But again, most of them are useless. They really are. Now, are there products, and I don't want to get into particular products, and I have no relationship to any of these products. I have no financial ties to any of this, but there are some that have been around a very long time and at least have borne the benefit of safety. They're not hurting people. They're sort of legitimate companies. VSL is one of them. VSL number 3, BioK, BioRad, Jarrow has been making probiotics for a very long time. Nestle actually makes, I think Culturelle is from Dannon. I'm not sure who, but there are some that are out there. But if you think you're taking them because you think it's improving your health and you're an overall healthy person, you're probably not. It's probably not altering your health at all.
And that's such a good point. And I appreciate you kind of giving us that animated and educational version of the walk through the grocery store, because that's something that we all face. And not only are we looking at the shelves, there's a whole section of refrigerated probiotics. And then you're like, okay, do I get them refrigerated or not? But anyway, I do want to talk about when probiotics can help. So what are the conditions where there's strong evidence supporting the use of probiotics?
Surprisingly, not many. And that question has been tried to be answered by a number of groups over the last few years. There's something called the Cochrane Collaborative, and Cochrane is just a think tank that puts together a bunch of smart people and says, and they're non-affiliated, they're not industry supported, they're kind of an independent think tank that does meta-analyses basically and looks at the data, whether that data is 10 papers or 100 papers or 1,000 papers, and does some very sophisticated analytics and says, this is what the data shows. And they've looked at this a few years ago. And our sister society, Jackie and I both are connected to the American College of Gastroenterology in a way. I'm a trustee, but there's NAGA. We have another society as well. They put out a very, very detailed technical review on probiotics just 2 or 3 years ago. And it was an extraordinary Herculean effort looking at an absurdly, giant amount of data to kind of distill that down into what does the science actually show. And in both cases, there's only 3 answers. There are literally only 3 things where I would say the evidence is conclusive or is supportive enough that we as caregivers and providers should say, yes, using probiotics helps this illness. There are another 100 where that may or may not be true. And let's start with those. ulcerative colitis and Crohn's disease and irritable bowel syndrome, right? The big three of our illness in the GI world. The data that that any particular strain of probiotic is going to alter the natural history of ulcerative colitis, Crohn's disease, or irritable bowel syndrome is non-existent. There is not a database to support that. Now, could there be data we don't know yet and we haven't figured out yet, or haven't tried the right bug or combination of bugs? That's possible. But if the question is, what is the data support? Right now, none of those things are supported by any data. So the three, yeah.
Can I just jump in here? So this is an important point, because what I have learned from being involved with ACG and looking at the guidelines and the guideline process is that there's the way that the guidelines are written. Sometimes there may be efficacy for a treatment, but there's not enough data to make and say in the guideline, yes, you should use this probiotic or this drug for this.
Yeah. So to elaborate on that point, I'll get back to it. In fact, the guidelines do say that there are areas, for example, C. diff, Crohn's and ulcerative colitis, where they don't say the data is negative. They say there's a knowledge gap, exactly as you just said, right? Where there's not a recommendation. It's just we don't know yet, yeah. And that's totally appropriate. But there are also scenarios, for example, in like gastroenteritis, acute infection gastroenteritis, right? You get food poisoning, call it what you will, right? They don't say we don't know about the data. They actually say, no, there's data and it doesn't help. So that's an actual recommendation against the use, right? Which is a little bit different than saying we don't know yet. Right. Those are slightly different things. So I would say that, so the things I just said, ulcerative colitis, Crohn's, and IBS, is more we don't know yet than there's strong data that they don't work. In the case of people with acute food poisoning, there actually is strong data that they don't work and we shouldn't be using them. And again, the guidelines, there's a distinction between saying we don't know, do it in part of a trial, versus no, we know, don't do it. So that's a really important distinction. And guidelines by definition are and should be really restrictive, right? You don't want guidelines to say yes unless the data is truly supportive. So they're conservative. You are correct. There may well be another 6, 8, 10 things that this works for, and we just don't know that yet. But we're stuck with today's data. And in today's data, there are 3 illnesses where the evidence is, and both groups actually came to a similar conclusion. I mentioned Cochrane and the AGE Tech Review, and they both came to similar conclusions. So I think it's probably right. And those 3 are prevention of C. difficile. And you and I have talked a lot about C. difficile and fecal transplant before. That's different, by the way, than treatment of C. difficile, where the data is unknown. And they call that a knowledge gap. We don't know that. They don't say it doesn't work. Mm-hmm. They say, we're not sure if it works as a treatment for C. diff, but there is reasonable data that in patients of high risk of C. diff, particularly ones who've had that before, or elderly, or have had multiple courses of prolonged antibiotics or immunosuppression, these are people who are at high risk of C. diff, that certain probiotics can lower the risk of C. diff. The one that has the kind of best data is actually not a bacteria. We're focused on bacteria here, but in fact, it's a yeast called Saccharomyces boulardii. People may have heard of Saccharomyces cerevisiae. That is a yeast that makes bread and beer. I'm a beer brewer, and I have Saccharomyces boulardii cerevisiae somewhere back there in a cabinet. Sac boulardii is another yeast that is not helpful for brewing or baking, but is not pathogenic. It doesn't hurt us, and it seems to kind of, the mechanisms are still unclear, but it seems to have some anti-C. diff effect. It may sort of block C. diff. It may be sort of running interference. We're here. You can't come in, C. diff. It may have some enzymes that actually sort of negatively affect C. diff. We're still figuring out why. But there's some data that this yeast probiotic called Sac boulardii can lower the risk of C. difficile in someone taking antibiotics. So that's one. And then there are some other data with some other multi-strain probiotics typically. And by the way, let me. I know I'm a little bit all over the place, but this is fascinating stuff. I'm going to get back to the other 2. Not almost every answer I'm going to give you today about a bacterial probiotic for efficacy is largely based on multi-strain combinations. So Sac boulardii lives alone. It's a yeast. It comes by itself. But most probiotics, for example, VSL is 8 different strains in one thing. Biorad is 3, I think. It gets confusing because there's 2 and 3 and 4 and 5. There's different strains that have multiple. But it's probably true that multiple strain products are going to be better than single strain. And the reason for that is we now understand very clearly that the conception of one bug, one outcome is ridiculously untrue. So you have 1,000 different species of bacteria in you, but if you think they're just 1,000 little individuals all hanging out in their own cubbies doing their telephone answering or whatever they're working on their typewriters, they're not. They're in families and units and communities and networks. We call them consortia. We use lots of different semantics for that. But the bugs are not lone rangers. They are not. No bug in us really functions in isolation. They function in networks, consortia, communities. You can come up with a lot of different synonyms for that. They all imply the same thing, which is that bugs are teams. They work in teams. They don't work in isolation. So the theory that you're going to take this pill of this bug or eat this yogurt with this one bug and somehow improve your health is ridiculous, because that's not how the bugs work within us. So there is some data circling back to the prevention of C. diff that some multi-strain probiotics and this one strain Sac boulardii can lower the risk of C. diff, particularly, and this is an important caveat, in high-risk people. If you do it to healthy 20-year-olds who are at low risk for C. diff, you're not going to help them because they're so unlikely to get C. diff anyway.
No, this is fascinating. It is fascinating stuff, but it makes a lot of sense, because if you look at something like IBS, which is so multifactorial, and there are many aspects of what's going on in your body that could impact the symptoms, why would you think that one strain of some bacteria is going to magically make you feel better? I mean, that totally makes sense. And everyone's so different. So it's very challenging. And I think, and I can't wait till we talk about the future of where the microbiome research is heading and targeted treatments to a specific, and I can't wait. I hope I'm still alive to see this, but when you're able to target a disease and what's going on in the microbiome and develop a treatment based on that particular personalization of the person's lack of a certain bacteria or yeast, for instance, that's going to be amazing. But we're not there yet. We know that.
We are not even close to there yet. You're exactly right. You're exactly, and that you could have. Thank you. You just wrote my closing soliloquy is exactly kind of what you just said in a very good way. All right, so let's circle back to what the evidence says probiotics truly work for. Right. So prevention of C. diff in someone taking antibiotics, mainly in those who are a higher risk of that. Sac boulardii or some multi-strain agents probably lower, not eliminate, but lower the risk of C. diff. Okay, what else? In a tiny fraction, it's a small population, but preterm and low birth weight infants, are at risk for, and I'm not a pediatric GI, so if I may say some silly things here, but they're at risk for something called NEC or NEC, or necrotizing enterocolitis, which can be fatal. It's a horrible thing.
Wow.
It's a gut disturbance that occurs typically in low birth weight and preterm infants. And the data is reasonable that a bunch of different, again, multi-strain agents, not one stringle, almost certainly requiring bifido, the one I mentioned before. That's a genus, not a species or a strain. I'll get to that. Or lactobacillus, that's another genus, or streptococcus, that's another one. You probably need some of those. And the data is pretty good that giving these low birth weight and or preterm infants some multi-strain probiotic, and it's not a consensus on what one yet, but probably lowers their risk of NEC or necrotizing enterocolitis. So that is probably a standard practice. Again, I don't work in an NICU, but it should be standard practice to supplement milk, because that's what your formula, whatever you're giving that, if you're orally feeding that preterm infant, probably via tube, to supplement their oral feeds with probiotics improves outcome. There's reasonable data that is true. Again, that's not relevant to any of us walking around, unless you happen to have a preterm baby. That's not relevant to any of us.
You mentioned, the C. diff situation, and this has been a thing since people started taking antibiotics and realizing the role of probiotics, right? And this question comes up a lot. We get this. Even my friends ask me, I'm taking an antibiotic. Do I need to take a probiotic? And when do I take the probiotic? Can you make some sense of this? This is a common question.
Yeah. The answer largely is that they don't do much, that they're not generally helping people. First of all, again, the pills, we don't know what they have in them. Two, the antibiotics probably killing some of those things. There is some moderate data, and the recommendations are not overt for this, that it might lower antibiotic-related diarrhea. So you may have a little less diarrhea with a probiotic with an antibiotic, and as I mentioned, it may lower the risk of C. difficile. So those are the things, but no, I would say most people who get an antibiotic should not do that. Most people who get an antibiotic should do exactly what I said before about eating, is using a diversity of living fermented cultured foods to that's the best answer. And in fact, people have done that study, and it seems to work in hospitals. For example, every time you give someone a pill antibiotic, give them a yogurt, give them a kefir with it or something, and you probably, that's a soft answer, you probably lower at least their likelihood of diarrhea. And then one other point I'll add to that: monotherapy is not helpful. One, we've talked before about the biome and something we call diversity of the biome, right? You've got, say, 1,000 different species of bacteria in you. That's a rough number, probably between 700 and, say, 1,500, somewhere in that ballpark. It's pretty clear that people who have more diversity, and there's a way to measure that. We have a technique, Shannon Diversity Index. There are ways to measure diversity of our biome. People with a more diverse biome tend to do better and be healthier than people with a less diverse biome. So, and antibiotics, by the way, clearly constrict the diversity of your biome. Poop transplants clearly expand the diversity of your biome. So you're getting this story. So that gives rise to a conclusion that is actually borne out by some science too, that taking, I'll send a patient home and say, go eat living foods. And they'll come back in 2 weeks later and say, Doc, I have a bottle of kombucha every single night. How am I doing? And my answer is, okay, that's fine. But a better strategy, you probably saturated whatever bug is in that kombucha or bugs. Probably 2 days later, you filled yourself up with that, and you're probably not helping yourself very much. But a better approach, borne out by some science, is have the kombucha on Monday, and the kimchi on Tuesday, and the kefir on Wednesday, and the miso on Thursday, and the tempeh on Friday, and the apples on Saturday, and all of those things. And diversify the inputs you're putting in, which should lead to a more diversification of your insides. So it's not one thing. No, just like it's not one bug, it's very much, you can't just say, I'm going to drink kombucha every day and be healthy. You should have kombucha Mondays and kefir Tuesdays.
No, I agree with that. And also you have to be, as a person who also loves kombucha, there's a lot of sugar in kombucha, and those jars, there's more than one serving in there. There are other different types of kombucha that have a lower sugar, and I've identified those, and they're great. So yeah, I think it's really important to diversify, because you don't want to keep doing the same thing. And also for IBS patients, right? If you're going to react and those sugars are going to trigger your symptoms, you're kind of not gaining anything.
Or the dairy in kefir, or the nightshades, or whatever. Yes. So it is difficult in an IBS patient sometimes, because they're sensitive. A lot of IBS is food sensitivity, as you know, and a lot of these foods may be challenging for people to take. But anyway, so diversify your input. Let's circle back to the third and final. Unfortunately, I wish the list was 10 long, but it's not. The evidence base for something called pouchitis is also very strong. So just to elaborate what pouchitis means, when people with inflammatory bowel disease, particularly Crohn's disease, get a colonic resection, we create a new anal pouch. We literally take the small bowel, kind of duplicate it. We fold it on itself because its small bowel is too small. We want it to be bigger. So we make a pouch. It's called an ileoanal pouch, and it's part of the small bowel, and it's surgically reconstructed to create a new rectum, if you will, or a neorectum, or an ileoanal pouch. Anyway, that pouch is small bowel. It's not colon, and it doesn't like a lot of poop. It's not used to that, and it gets inflamed, and it's called pouchitis. So pouchitis is inflammation within this neopouch. turns out there's some reasonably good data that of all this one particular probiotic, it's an H strain one, again, highlighting that multiple strains make sense, called VSL number 3, has evidence, pretty good evidence in support of its benefit in pouchitis, and the guidelines overtly recommend that. It is not a maybe. It says, yeah, if your patient has pouchitis, this H strain probiotic is a very reasonable intervention based on science and probably beneficial. Now, those 3 things are a pretty small part of the world, right? I mean, necrotizing enterocolitis, thank God, is very uncommon, but and pouchitis is quite uncommon, and C. diff is relatively uncommon. So you're talking a tiny little market here. That being said, as you well know, something like $70 billion were spent last year, and assuredly those were not just those people with those 3 things.
No, that's what's so mind-blowing. And before we get into the question that I really want to ask you is, are there any groups of people who should avoid probiotics?
Yeah, actually, really great question. Thank you. Particularly, we have concerns in immunosuppressed people, and we have real concerns in people who have indwelling catheters. So there are, for example, reports like an IV. You can have an IV if you're getting chemotherapy or regular infusions. We put IVs in people that live there, that aren't temporary. They sort of stay inside you to get your chemo or your immune suppression or whatever you're getting. People have dialysis catheters and things like that. Those are portals of entry, unfortunately. And there are reports of people getting bacteremias or fungemias from the S. boulardii I mentioned earlier, a yeast, right? So there are reports of people so I don't give, for example, S. boulardii to anyone who has a line in at all. If you have a foreign object entering your body at some point, that is a danger with probiotics, and I would be reluctant to use that. Those are the main ones I worry about.
That's a really great point. Thank you for that. So I really appreciate the evidence-based nature of the conversation. That's always what we're about. But at the end of the day, there are people who are listening that are diehard probiotics fans, and they're going to buy a probiotic because maybe they feel better. So can you help us navigate, for those of us who are adamant about taking a probiotic, what do we need to know? And there's so much conflicting information out there. There's influencers peddling everything from skincare to drinks to shakes to chocolate bars that have these probiotics, and it's overwhelming. Do we need to ingest all of this?
You left out skin creams and vaginal douches too, by the way, right?
Yeah, the skin cream.
Yeah. For real, there are.
I know the skin cream. I actually tried some. It didn't do anything.
Yeah. Okay. You're asking a super important question, Jackie, and I wish I had a really good answer for you, but I honestly don't. I think the best answer is, instead of validating that mindset, I would try to say change that mindset, which is you're looking for a kind of magic bullet that's not really there. And a far healthier attitude would be to eat a healthier diet. Now, look, they're not harmful. So let me just be clear. Most probiotics are not harmful. The number of instances there are, so I shouldn't say zero, but for the most part, these are safe products. And I would say they're more inert than actively problematic. But I think most of them are neither doing good nor bad. So all you're wasting is your money. There's a tiny bit of evidence for them doing bad, but that's extremely rare. I don't want to frighten people away from them. But I wouldn't waste your money. And I think in a way it's kind of a little bit of a cop-out, right? I want to do my health, so I'm going to take it in my pill. I'm going to have my probiotic gummy or whatever. And no, the answer is not to do that. The answer is to eat apples and high fiber. If you're going to buy one, I would buy a reputable company that's been around a long time. I mentioned some of them before. I don't want to get too much into kind of promoting particular brands, but they have been Dannon and Align and VSL and BioK Plus, I think is actually the official name. They have been, BioRad's a company, I take that one back. They've been around. Gyrodophilus is another one. These are companies been around for couple of decades as far as I know. So they're not little fly-by-night operators. They're probably not messing up too bad, or we would have figured that out by now. So I think you're better off with that. But by the way, we didn't mention this other thing called a prebiotic. I'll just throw it in there.
Oh God, I was going to ask about that with all those sodas out there, Poppy and Ollie and all those things. I don't even think people know what a prebiotic is.
Okay, so that's a nice segue into prebiotics. Just for the listeners, rather not readers, the listeners. Prebiotics are bug food. Think of them literally as a synonym for the fuel or the food for the bugs, either the bugs that you're adding or the bugs that you already have. It's sugars and fibers basically that feed bugs. Once again, similar to my other argument, the answer is not to take a prebiotic pill. The answer is to eat healthy food. Fiber is a spectacular prebiotic. Fiber is what feeds, enriches our biome, enriches our bugs. There's a reason your doctor keeps telling you to eat a high fiber diet. So tell yourself you're eating a prebiotic, right? I'm having my brand cereal tomorrow morning, and if I want to call it prebiotic, call it prebiotic. That's my prebiotic cereal. It's just grape nuts, but it's a prebiotic. It absolutely is a prebiotic. We just don't call it that. And just to make the semantics even more complicated, there's something called a symbiotic, which is both, which is a prebiotic and a probiotic together. So look how special we are, because once the billions wars got exhausted, someone hit 100 billion. There's no more ceiling at the top of the billions war. Now we have to name things differently to convince people to buy them. So mine is better than yours because I'm not just a probiotic. I'm a probiotic and a prebiotic. And you know what? Marketing works, right? Marketing absolutely works. But that's not really a logical tale, just for our listeners. Prebiotics, substitute the word good healthy diet for prebiotic, and you're far better.
I'm glad you brought this up because this is one of my things that pain me to see what patients are going through when you have these, and we've talked about this before, but I want to reiterate it now. And it kind of goes along with what you're saying this whole episode. The tests that claim to check your microbiome, and people are spending hundreds and hundreds of dollars and then being told that this, and this probiotic can help them. Can you just shed some?
I can elaborate on that. First of all, if that sentence ends with, and we will sell you this to fix you, run as far as you can, as fast as you can away from that person because they are lying to you. So yeah, there's now a dozen companies, at least I'm aware of on the market, who will send you, if you send them $200 or $250 or $300, they'll send you a little kit. You swab your stool, you send it back in, and 10 days later, you'll get emailed a 20-page packet of colors and charts and pies and lists and sliders from red over here and green over here. If you've ever seen them, they're extraordinarily overloaded with data because that's kind of all they can offer you. And they'll tell you you've got this and that and the other. And I don't think they're lying to you. I'm pretty sure those 20 pages of data are accurate. The bugs they're listing are probably the bugs you do have. That's not my problem. My problem is that and if they ended there and said, here's your list, thank you for your $200, that would be a fair transaction. The world would be fine. It doesn't end there. They're not stopping with that. They're saying, and here's a product that's customized, especially, like you said earlier, for you. You don't have enough of Bifido, so here's our proprietary blend of special action Bifido, and if you buy this for $50 a month, subscribe to this, we will fix your problem. That's the completely false statement at the end of that you can take that information and translate it into medically actionable interventions. I and nobody else I know are aware of any good science that says you can interpret. Again, it's not lying. They're not lying about the data. The data is the data. But the lie is that if you now buy product X, Y, or Z, that will correct your problem. It's simply not true. It has never been shown. And again, I would discourage you can get it analyzed. If you want a list of your bugs to put up on the refrigerator, you can do that. I'm okay. I've done it. I've actually done it.
Is it still up on your refrigerator?
No, but I use it in lectures because it's awesome. A good thing to teach about. So I use mine. I show mine, and it's a pretty chart and a graph. But I really don't think anyone should be trusting an interpretation that includes a sale of a particular agent that's going to fix that for you. If the interpretation is go eat more fermented foods, hallelujah, they're right. Congratulations, good advice. If their interpretation is eat a healthier diet, exercise more, don't smoke, don't drink, those are all good things, right? But if the thing is subscribe to my proprietary blend of herbs and spices because I will make you better, sorry, nonsense.
No, thank you for addressing that. And I know you and I could go on and talk all night about this, but what's coming down the pipe? Like, what do we have to look forward to, the research and the future of probiotics?
Yeah, I am not. So despite my current pessimism, which I'm clearly telegraphing to you, that's me, but that's okay. My job is to be skeptical and prove me wrong. I'd like nothing better than to be embarrassed about how wrong I am in 5 years. You can play this back and say, Neil, you were saying all this nonsense, but look what we've got. That would be fabulous. It's probably not going to happen in 5 years, but it will happen. And I am long-term optimistic, Jackie. I really am. What do we need? We need the data. We need a ton of data because the moving parts in this are so many. And again, it's not just a list of bugs. It's list of bugs and how they work together. And the computational biology involved in this is extraordinary. The computing power you need and the AI that you need is extraordinary. And the data, which we're now collecting, there's a lot of repositories of biome samples and sort of citizen science donated stuff to get this. I believe we can get there. And what we're going to get to is exactly what you said, probably better than I'll say right now, which is kind of a precision medicine or a customized medicine, is taking Jackie's poop and looking it under and putting it through a bunch of, washer dryers and come out and say, you know what, Jackie, you need these 4 things. It's not going to be one thing. I'm certain of that. Right. But you need this combination, these 4 things. You can find them in these foods or this product or this, and we will be able to do that. I believe that will come. I genuinely do. I mean, I believe in the power of the biome. I believe the biome, while overhyped, underlies a lot of health and illness. And I believe biome interventions, bacteriotherapy, biome restorative. We don't even know the names for these things yet, but we did a whole talk on poop transplants, and at some level, isn't the poop transplant really just a super probiotic? It's all of them, right? Since I'm telling you, I don't know which bugs and which dose and which kind of micro. If you think about it in a sort of meta way, a fecal transplant is in essence the ultimate probiotic. It is acknowledging that I'm ignorant to which bugs, which dose, which pill, which style. So instead, I'm kind of pressing the easy button and saying, you know what, give it all, and probably the good guys are in there. And that's why FMT is working. Because we're giving it all. We really are. We're not parsing it down to the pill of this or the pill of that. Will we get there? Yeah, I am optimistic we will. One of the FMT products on the market today is what we call a consortium product. There's 2 on the market. That's a different podcast, but one is whole stool, which is, again, exactly what I just said. I don't know which bug, so give it all. That's a rational thing to do, and that's what one of the approved products are, bacteriotherapy or LBPs, that's a new term, by the way, LBP, live biotherapeutic product. One of them is stool, but the other is a pill of a subset of Firmicutes spores, a particular kind of bacteria. And it looks like it works, and it's, I think, 12 of them together. So we're funneling down to that, but we are so far away from that finish line. We are so far away from that. So I'm optimistic. We're making baby steps, but if the funnel, is out here, we're not even close to the narrow. We're still up in the very broad part of that funnel.
Well, this has been such a great conversation, and I would like to maybe revisit that topic about the stool pills and learn more about that for our listeners at a later date. But I really appreciate your time and your insight. This has been a lot of fun and very educational. So thank you so much.
You are so very welcome. Thanks for indulging me and listening to me babble for a few minutes. I appreciate it.
Thank you for listening to the Gastro Girl podcast. For more information and resources, please visit gastrogirl.com. Do you have a question for Gastro Girl? Please email podcast@gastrogirl.com. The information, opinions, and recommendations presented in the Gastro Girl podcast are not a substitute for medical advice from your healthcare professional. Please consult a licensed clinician in your state regarding all matters related to your health.